An 8-year-old girl's innocent yet profound question left a crowded town hall captivated and brought Elon Musk, the world-renowned visionary, to a moment of vulnerability rarely seen in the public eye. The evening began as a typical community gathering in a modest fellowship hall in Austin, Texas. The room, usually filled with cheerful potlucks and group discussions, now buzzed with anticipation as Elon Musk stood at the podium. Known for his bold ambitions to colonize Mars and reshape humanity's future, tonight he seemed uncharacteristically introspective. The crowd, a mix of families, young dreamers, and retirees, sat quietly as Musk began speaking about technology, sustainability, and the possibilities of life beyond Earth. But in the crowd sat a figure who seemed out of place. 8-year-old Sophie, dressed in her best blue dress, clutching a dog-eared journal close to her chest. It was her most treasured possession, given by her father, a science teacher who had always encouraged her curious spirit. Her mother had whispered to her before the event, "If you feel brave enough, you can ask your question, but only if it's from your heart." Sophie had nodded, her small hands trembling with both excitement and fear. For weeks she had rehearsed her question, whispering it to herself before bed and writing it over and over in her journal. It wasn't a question of childish wonder, it was something that weighed on her deeply. As Elon spoke, his words seemed distant to Sophie, her heart pounding in her chest. Finally, the moment came. The floor opened for questions, and a line quickly formed with adults eager to ask about electric vehicles, artificial intelligence, and interplanetary travel. Sophie hesitated, shrinking into her chair. But when her mother gave her a gentle nudge, she took a deep breath and stood, her legs shaky but determined. When it was her turn, Elon Musk looked down at her, his usually intense gaze softening. "And what's your question, young lady?" he asked, his voice quieter than usual. Sophie's voice quivered but didn't break as she asked, "Mr. Musk, what gives you hope for the future?" The room fell silent. Every eye turned toward the small girl, her question hanging in the air like a weight no one could ignore. Elon Musk, a man known for his quick wit and boundless confidence, paused, clearly moved. For a moment, he seemed at a loss for words, but as he looked at Sophie, something shifted in him. Elon Musk's usual demeanor, filled with sharp intellect and rapid responses, gave way to a rare and visible vulnerability. He glanced down at the floor, then back at Sophie, the corners of his lips forming a faint, thoughtful smile. The room seemed to hold its collective breath, the weight of her question pressing on everyone. "That's a big question," Elon finally said, his voice quieter than the crowd was used to hearing. "Hope isn't something I've always been certain about." The confession took the room by surprise. Musk, the man who spoke with unwavering certainty about conquering Mars and solving humanity's biggest challenges, was admitting to doubt. But as he continued, his tone softened, and his words began to carry the unmistakable weight of personal experience. "When I was a kid," he began, "I spent hours reading books about the universe, about stars, planets, and the mysteries of what's out there. I'd stare at the night sky for hours, imagining all the things humanity could accomplish. But as I grew older, I realized that the world isn't as simple as I thought. I saw problems, huge, overwhelming problems. Climate change, poverty, war. There were moments when I wondered if we could ever overcome them." He paused, his eyes scanning the audience before returning to Sophie. "But here's what I've learned, Sophie," he said, his voice steadying. "Hope doesn't come from ignoring the challenges. It comes from facing them head-on and believing that we have the power to make things better." Sophie's grip on her journal loosened slightly, her eyes never leaving his. Encouraged by her unwavering gaze, Musk continued, "You know, there was a time when Tesla almost didn't make it. We were days away from running out of money, and everyone told me it was impossible. I was scared, more scared than I've ever been. But I remembered why I started in the first place, to help create a future where we don't destroy the planet we live on. That purpose kept me going." The audience was silent, hanging on his every word. Musk glanced at Sophie's journal and then back at her. "Sometimes hope isn't about knowing the answers. It's about believing that the effort is worth it, even when the outcome is uncertain." The sincerity in his voice resonated deeply. Sophie blinked back tears, her small frame seeming to radiate strength as she absorbed his words. The room, once filled with murmurs and polite clapping, now felt like a sanctuary where people were witnessing something raw, honest, and profoundly human. As Elon finished, he gave Sophie a gentle nod. "Thank you for asking that question, Sophie," he said softly. "Because hope doesn't just live in people like me. It lives in people like you." Sophie stood rooted to her spot, her journal clutched tightly against her chest as Elon Musk's words settled over the room. For a moment, the hum of life seemed to pause, as if the very air was holding its breath. Then, quietly, Sophie asked, "But what if people don't believe in the future? What if they give up?" Her question wasn't just for Elon, it was for everyone in the room, and perhaps for humanity itself. The weight of her words lingered, challenging Elon to dig even deeper. He stepped away from the podium, his tall figure silhouetted against the dim light of the stage. His gaze softened as he knelt slightly, bringing himself to Sophie's eye level. "You're right," he said, his voice tinged with both sadness and resolve. "There are times when people lose faith, when the challenges feel too big, and the world feels like it's falling apart. I've seen it happen, and I've felt it myself." The audience leaned forward, utterly captivated by the moment unfolding before them. Elon continued, "But here's the thing. Giving up isn't the end. It's a pause, a moment to regroup. And sometimes, all it takes to reignite that belief is a single spark, a person, an idea, or even a question as brave as yours." He straightened slightly and gestured toward the crowd. "Do you see all these people here tonight?" he asked Sophie. "Every single one of them came because they care about something. Maybe it's their family, their community, or the world they want to leave behind for the next generation. That's where hope begins, not with one person, but with all of us together." Sophie's eyes widened as she looked around the room, noticing how many faces were now turned toward her, their expressions filled with warmth and encouragement. Musk, sensing the impact of his words, continued with a renewed energy. "When SpaceX launched its first rocket, it failed. Then it failed again, and again. People called me crazy, said I was wasting time and money. But with each failure, my team and I learned. We improved. And on the fourth try, we made it." He paused, letting his words sink in. "If I had given up after the first failure, we wouldn't have sent astronauts to the International Space Station. We wouldn't be preparing to go to Mars. Progress isn't a straight line, Sophie. It's messy, frustrating, and often heartbreaking, but it's worth it." A ripple of murmured agreement swept through the audience. Elon returned his gaze to Sophie, his expression both tender and resolute. "So when people lose faith, it's up to those of us who still believe to show them why they shouldn't. We have to keep climbing, even when the ladder feels shaky. Because if we don't, who will?" Sophie nodded slowly, her young face lighting up with newfound determination. "I understand," she said softly, her voice carrying more strength than her years. Musk smiled, a rare, genuine expression that lit up his features. "Good," he replied, "because the future depends on dreamers like you." The room remained hushed, as if Elon Musk's words had created a shared moment of reflection for everyone present. Sophie's innocent yet profound question had shifted the evening from a typical talk about innovation to something deeply personal and universally human. A man seated near the back of the room raised his hand hesitantly. He looked like an ordinary mechanic, work-worn hands, a plaid shirt, and tired eyes. "Mr. Musk," he began, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. "I've worked hard all my life, but I've seen jobs disappear, families struggle, and the world grow more uncertain. How can someone like me believe in the future when all I see is struggle?" Elon turned toward him, his gaze steady. "That's a powerful question," he said, his tone serious yet empathetic. "And it's one I think about every day. The struggles you face, the sacrifices you make, they're real, and they're hard. But they're also the foundation of progress. Every time someone works a long shift, fixes something broken, or cares for their family, they're building the future, piece by piece." He began to pace slowly, his hands gesturing as he spoke. "You see, progress isn't just made in labs or boardrooms. It's made in homes, factories, and fields, by people like you who show up every day even when it's tough. The work you do may not always feel revolutionary, but it is. Without it, none of the big ideas I talk about would ever happen." The man nodded, his face softening as Musk's words resonated. Elon continued, his voice growing firmer. I believe in creating a world where everyone has the tools and opportunities to thrive. That's why I work on things like renewable energy, universal internet access, and sustainable transportation. Because the future shouldn't just be for a select few, it should be for all of us. Sophie, who had been listening intently, raised her voice again. So, the future depends on everyone working together? Elon turned back to her, his expression brightening. Exactly, Sophie. The future isn't something that just happens to us. It's something we build together, step by step. Every choice we make, every act of kindness, every moment of effort, it all adds up. The energy in the room began to shift. What had started as a solemn discussion now felt like a rallying call, a shared mission to take part in shaping the future. The mechanic, his voice steady now, added, So even the small things matter? Elon smiled, his eyes warm with sincerity. Especially the small things, he said, because when you put them together they become something extraordinary. The crowd erupted into applause, not the polite kind that often follows a public speaker, but a genuine, heartfelt response. Sophie smiled widely, her cheeks flushed with excitement as she turned to her mother, who gave her a proud, tearful nod. As the applause gradually died down, the atmosphere in the room remained electric, charged with a newfound sense of unity and purpose. Elon Musk stepped back to the podium, his gaze sweeping over the audience, lingering briefly on Sophie before continuing. I want to leave you with one last thought, he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. Every single one of us has a role to play in building the future. It's not about being the smartest, the strongest, or the wealthiest. It's about showing up, caring, and daring to believe that what we do matters. He glanced at Sophie, a warm smile breaking across his face. Take Sophie, for example. Tonight she reminded all of us that hope doesn't come from having all the answers. It comes from asking the right questions, and sometimes it's the smallest voices that echo the loudest. Sophie beamed, her hands gripping her journal tightly as if it were a source of strength. Elon continued, addressing the room with a conviction that resonated in every corner. The future isn't written yet. It's a blank canvas, and every action we take is a stroke of the brush. Together we can paint a world that we're proud to pass on to the next generation. He paused for a moment, letting the weight of his words settle. Then, with a softer tone, he added, And when it feels hard, when it feels like the challenges are too great, remember this, you're not alone, none of us are. As long as we have each other, we'll always have hope. The room erupted into a standing ovation, the sound of applause filling the hall with a sense of collective gratitude and inspiration. People turned to one another, exchanging smiles, hugs, and a renewed sense of connection. As Elon stepped away from the podium, he walked over to Sophie, kneeling so they were eye to eye once more. Thank you, Sophie, he said, his voice low but sincere. You reminded me why I do what I do. Never stop asking questions, and never stop believing in what's possible. Sophie extended her small hand to shake his, her face glowing with pride. Thank you, Mr. Musk, she replied, her voice steady now, for giving me hope. Elon stood, giving her a final nod before turning to wave at the crowd as he exited. The room buzzed with quiet chatter, strangers connecting over the moment they had all just shared. Sophie looked up at her mother, her eyes bright with excitement. Mom, she whispered, do you think I could help build the future too? Her mother smiled, brushing a strand of hair from Sophie's face. You already have, sweetheart, she said softly. You already have. As the crowd slowly dispersed, the lingering message was clear. The future wasn't just an abstract dream. It was a promise, built by the courage to believe and the willingness to act. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to reflect on what the future means to you. Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to join us for more stories that inspire and challenge us to be our best. Together, we can keep the hope alive. See you next time.